Hello YouTube, Jonathan here, and for this video we are going to take a look at the allies in this game of Axis and Allies Pacific, the version from 1991. We already took a look at Japan, and it has a ton of units, and there are a lot of things that it wants to do on its first turn, and several ways that it can win the game, either by conquest, taking an enemy capital while keeping its own, or by acquiring enough victory points. They get 1 victory point for every 10 IPCs they collect. The Allies, in contrast, they also have 2 ways they can win, one of which is by taking Tokyo and not having lost their capitals, and the other one is to force Japan into a turn where Japan collects 0 victory points, which would be very difficult to do. So those are the 2 things the Allies can do to win. There are really 2 allied forces in this game. There's the United States and China, which go on this, technically are different countries, but they're going to go on the same turn. And then you've got the British forces, which are India and Australia. Now you see these red chips scattered throughout the board. Those are left over, if you've seen my Japanese video, left over from that, just indicating all of the places that Japan is likely to attack on the first turn. So for the Allies, actually the US is the only country that starts with a lot of production. They start with 75. Both the British forces start with very little, as well as Japan, though Japan's going to gobble up a lot on its first turn. China is unique in amongst these powers in that they get 1 infantry for every territory they control that is worth production. So they actually have 2, so they're going to get 2 infantry per turn, plus a 3rd infantry if the Burma Road is totally in Allied hands. And Japan is going to try and take 1 of those away on the first turn. The other 2 are pretty far away from Japanese-controlled territory, and England is over here, India is over here. It can help move in. So these are, China's probably going to get 2 or 3 infantry pretty much every turn, at least the first few turns. As Japan is likely also going to take out significant forces, significant naval forces, though there is still navy over here, as well as down here and over here that Japan can't get to. So we're going to go through each of the allies one at a time. We'll go ahead and start with China. Now China can't really do much. It has infantry and it has a fighter over here. And so what China wants to do is look for weak spots in the Japanese forces if Japan decides that it wants to move over here, which is something that I talked about a little bit in the Japanese video. Where are the Japanese forces weak? Is there a place that you can attack and take out a couple of their units, maybe take out a tank or an artillery? Those are going to be prized casualties if you can take them out and weaken the Japanese coming in this way. If you can kind of blunt them a little bit, that puts you in a better position, of course. You also are going to be looking for opportunities. It probably is not going to happen early, but if you're in such a position where maybe you can take a coastal territory, if Japan maybe isn't paying attention to you, they're focused too much elsewhere, maybe you can take some of their production away. And you could potentially, move down here into Hong Kong to help get the Allies a little bit of production back. For the most part, you are just looking to try and blunt the Japanese and counterattack as you are able to maybe knock out a tank or an artillery or something like that, just to slow them down and make this battle too costly for them. Now you are going to get some help from India down here as far as the Burma Road goes, getting you that extra infantry. I would recommend that the Indian forces don't try and think too grand. Their economy is not going to be that great. The first thing is just to keep control of their capital, Calcutta. That is paramount. And then as the kind of secondary objectives, help China keep the Burma Road open and keep Japan from going too far up this way, and if possible, start pushing in down here. Now, you may be in a position, if the Japanese Navy is not harassing you too much, to try and swing down here and start getting these islands. That will hurt Japan significantly if you are able to do that. That is not something they are likely going to allow. They'll probably position themselves pretty strongly down there to prevent that very thing. But keep in mind that you do have some Navy over here. 2 sets, you can try and consolidate that. And then see if you try to keep this alive, basically, these 2 fleets, and then just try and build up. And if Japan is focused somewhere else, then you can turn the tide on them over here. If maybe their fleet isn't in this area, maybe they decide they want to go after Australia, you might have the opportunity to start quickly building up and taking these out, and then maybe moving further into here as well. Now, as far as Australia goes, Australia kind of is the middle country. You've got India way over here, you've got Australia down here, and you have the US up there. So, and you do have a number of ships over here that you are likely to still have after Japan takes its first turn. What I would recommend is trying, well, of course, try to keep those ships alive, but if you can, coordinate with the American players, see where they're going to put their navy, and if you can coordinate your ships to meet up with theirs, then that's what you would want to do. Because that allows you to have a 1-2 punch where your fleets are combined on Japan's turn, and then, but you have the option where England can venture off if it wants to, the US can go a different way, or England can move and then the US can move its fleet so that they are always combined. That's going to be very important, especially early when Japan has major naval assets and the Allies are still trying to build up. Making your fleet as strong defensively as possible is going to be a good move for you. Kind of like India, if you are in a position to kind of sweep up here and start taking these islands, that's what you'll want to do. That's unlikely early in the game. However, if the opportunity presents itself, of course, that's something you want to do. If it's more likely that you are going to consolidate your navy with the U.S. because it is all over here, rather than trying to consolidate with the Indian forces over here. Though you are basically looking to consolidate as much as possible, assuming that that is enough to give you a decent defense. If you consolidate everything and the Japanese are still positioned to wipe you out, then the focus should be on spreading out so they can't take out everything. So you want to keep an eye out for what the Japanese can bring to bear, and either consolidate or spread out depending on what the situation calls for. It's also likely going to take you several turns to build up here before you're able to do anything, and you want to make sure that you hang on to your capital. Keep an eye on all Japanese transports. One thing that all the Allies need to keep in mind as well, Japanese destroyers are able to move 1 infantry. Now, it has to be on non-combat, but that is something. They are able to move forces around a little bit faster on the battlefield. And so you need to be aware the transports can be used for amphibious assaults, the destroyers cannot. However, destroyers could still move units up to the front, so they're a little bit closer. Maybe the next turn a transport can pick them up and move them in, or a destroyer can fortify a territory. Let's say that the Japanese took this territory here, and you think, oh, they only have so many transports, I'm not going to attack it this turn because I'll be stronger next turn. Well, keep in mind that on their next turn they can use just the destroyers to non-combat infantry down here. And if it's otherwise going to be a close battle, then that could turn the tide against you. So just something to keep in mind. Now we're going to switch over to the United States. The U.S. gets a ton of production, far more than anybody else. Even after Japan has run its rampage on the first turn, the U.S. is going to have close to twice the production of Japan. Now, the U.S. isn't really in a position to take much new production. It won't be for a while. It has this huge distance that it needs to travel before it can start getting anything. But it has a ton of production. It needs to use that production to its maximum effect. You can't just sit back and build up and build up and build up in this game because of that victory point counter. If you let a handful of turns go by where Japan is collecting 40 plus IPCs, that's 4 victory points per turn. All they need are 22 to win the game. So you can't afford to do that. So what you want to do as the U.S. is to use your production and move as quickly as possible. If the Japanese have split up their fleet, you want, or have a weakened fleet that you can take out, you want to try and take it out quickly. You will want to use a combination of Marines and artillery. Marines are able to attack at a 2 in amphibious assaults. You're going to be doing a ton of amphibious assaults here, as well and then they attack at 3 if they have artillery support. Now, one cool thing about Marines is that if they are present in a battle, even if they are not the ones that landed by transport, as long as you landed something by transport, all of your Marines in that battle will attack at a 2. And 3s paired up with artillery. So that's pretty powerful when you couple them with artillery. In this game, you will see that there are some territories, like Hawaii, that have the air base icon, which allows fighters to consider the island as well as the sea zone to be one territory for the purposes of counting movement. You'll also see the anchor icon there. That means there's a naval base. When moving from one naval base to another, ships are able to move 3 spaces. And so, taking into account where these naval bases are and positioning your fleet to take advantage of them is something that the U.S. is going to want to do in order to move into here as quickly as possible. So for example, naval base in Hawaii, naval base in New Britain. 1, 2, 3. The U.S. from here can get here. And from here, it can reinforce Australia. It can't quite get to these money islands, but it's close. And your next stop could be down here. Let's see, which gets you within 2 spaces of here. And there's another naval base here, and there's another naval base here. And so, in order to efficiently continue your train of surface ships, your train of transports, yeah, the first time down, you may have to take some of these territories if Japan has taken them. And the further you get over here, the more likely that's going to be. But by taking them, that means that your next ships can move that much more efficiently. And a lot of Japan's production is coming from here. And so the faster you can take this out, the better off you're going to be. You can team up with Australian forces, like I talked about just a little bit ago when we were talking about Australia, to become more efficient. Maybe if the U.S. indicates where it wants to go and it's an island controlled by Japan, maybe at that point Java over here is controlled by Japan. Maybe Australia can come in and take it. That way, on the U.S.'s turn, it can count it as a friendly seaport and get that extra movement bonus. As far as turn order, Japan goes first, then the British forces, and the U.S. goes last. So if England is able to do that, that's going to help out the U.S. quite a bit. Even though they don't have a ton of forces, neither Australia nor India, by focusing in that way, it allows the U.S. to be a lot more efficient, and that allows the U.S. to bring its huge production advantage to bear much more quickly, which is a huge benefit to Australia and India. And so that, as much as anything else, is a very significant contribution that these countries can make if Japan leaves themselves open to it. Now, Japan is also going to be concerned. It has these ports that it needs to watch out for. If it's trying to go after Australia or after India to get the capitals, it has to position its forces there. It also, even if these ports are out of the question, just because of positioning. The U.S. can move without ports. It's a little bit slower, but they can start coming in this way. And so Japan has a lot that it needs to defend, and it's going to have to pick and choose what it wants to do. Now, Japan should choose whatever it thinks is going to extend the game the longest so it can collect victory points. And the U.S. eventually wants to get to a point where it can take on the Japanese Navy, but that probably is going to be a little ways down the road. My take is that all of the allies working in concerted effort should work as quickly as possible to limit the Japanese Navy, taking it out where they can without suffering undue casualties, and then just try and knock out some of the base production that Japan gets that it's counting on to rack up those victory points, and then slowly squeeze in on Japan. That is what I would say for all of the allies in this game. I hope that you all enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave a comment if you like. I really do appreciate those.